unless it would win the war within a few days or weeks. Now let me turn to the next question, that is the relationship of government and money. In these circles, and Walter Block spoke about this already to a certain extent, and it is hardly necessary to explain in great detail that money is a natural outgrowth of a market economy. In barter, as Walter has explained, due to the existence of uncertainty, there exist fundamental obstacles to trade. Not always are double coincidences of once in existence, and hence direct trade becomes impossible. And as a way out of this predicament, mankind begins to look for especially marketable goods and trades whatever one has to sell for more marketable goods in order to be able then to turn around and acquire with these more marketable goods those things that one really wants. That is, man begins to demand things to be used neither as a consumer good nor as a producer good, but as a medium of exchange, that is, as a facilitator of exchange. And other people then copy this practice, and sooner or later most people in society use the same good for the same purpose as money, that is, as a commonly used medium of exchange. And as trade becomes worldwide, a tendency toward the use of a single worldwide used medium of exchange comes into existence, and that is historically the international gold standard. Money then comes into existence as a commodity money, and in fact money is the most easily saleable of all commodities. It is produced by the market like any other good. There exists competition in gold mining, there exists competition in gold minting, and there exists next to and besides genuine money also money substitutes, that is titles, banknotes, titles to money. And that then is the situation that governments find themselves confronted with, that is a commodity money such as gold, produced by profit-driven money producers and entirely outside of the control of government itself. Now recall the definition of government as a monopolist of jurisdiction and of taxation, and assume no more than self-interest for government agents. That is, that as just like everyone else, government agents prefer more over less income. Now, what then will be a government's position vis-à-vis a market-provided money? As should be immediately clear, it will try to gain monopolistic control over the supply of money so as to be able to enrich itself at the expense of its subjects, very much in the same way as it enriches itself at the expense of its subjects by the means of taxation. In order to reach this goal, a government must take 3 consecutive steps. And all governments everywhere have taken these steps. Some of them have that done earlier and some later, but all of them have done so and did so in the same order. The first step is a government monopolizes the minting of gold. No one except the government mint is permitted to produce gold coins. With this step, it becomes possible for the government to engage in coin clipping, that is, to reduce surreptitiously the gold content of coins. In recalling and reminting gold coins and reducing, let's say, the gold content of a coin by 10% and increasing the supply of coins by 10%, the government essentially accomplishes the same thing as raising the tax rate by 10%, except, of course, that it is more difficult to understand the causes and consequences of inflation than it is to understand the causes and consequences of higher taxes. But of course this first step is still highly unsatisfactory from the point of view of government, because it cannot engage in this practice over and over again without some people eventually noticing what is going on. Hence, the second step will be taken. The government now monopolizes the production of money substitutes, that is, of paper titles to gold property. No one except the government bank can issue banknotes redeemable at par into genuine money. The commercial banks may only produce checkbook money, that is, substitutes of money substitutes. That is, paper that is convertible at par into government-produced paper, which in turn can be converted into genuine money or gold. Now, with this step, it becomes possible for a government to engage in fractional reserve banking practices. That is, the government bank creates out of thin air additional money substitutes, additional titles, uncovered by genuine money. Or put differently, it creates more titles to money property than there is money property in existence. By bringing these titles into circulation, it enriches itself at the expense of the general public. Again, an increase of money substitutes created practically at zero cost of, again, let's say 10% beyond gold coverage has the same effect as a 10% tax increase, but once again, taking the course of inflation, it is more difficult to detect than the tax increase. However, even the second step is of course unsatisfactory from the point of view of government, because eventually the public will perceive what is going on, and when it does, runs on the central bank will occur. The holders of titles of money will want to have their titles redeemed into the genuine thing, that is gold, but of course, since there exist more titles to gold than there is gold, the central bank will be faced with a run. Either it will have to go bankrupt, or it will have to suspend specie payment. And accordingly, then, the third step follows. The government goes off the gold standard, the gold deposited in government vaults is confiscated, and the private ownership of gold is outlawed. And having acquired purchasing power as something more than mere pieces of paper, namely as titles to genuine money, the former money substitutes now become real money. We have then a pure fiat paper currency that takes the place of the former commodity gold standard. And finally, or so it seems, the government has reached complete counterfeiting autonomy and can print money out of thin air and acquire real goods with this paper. The only remaining task seems to be that of avoiding hyperinflation. But in fact, other problems and obstacles remain in place even then. And I will immediately come to address these problems. Before doing so, however, I want to make a few remarks concerning the question of how the government can get away with taking the three steps that I just outlined. It can only do so if it succeeds in creating a favorable public opinion. And in order to do so, it will have to promote a few myths. That is, make the public believe a few erroneous but somehow plausible sounding propositions. The first one of these is that competition in money production will lead to fraud by profit-driven capitalists. Even though, in fact, of course, competition is precisely the means of reducing the likelihood of fraud, and fraud will actually be made more likely if money is produced by a monopolist, by a single agency. The second myth that governments promote in this transition is that a commodity money involves substantial resource costs. Walter spoke about that too, which could be saved and the resources could be productively invested if one had a paper money instead of a gold standard in place. In fact, however, as even an ardent paper money fan as Milton Friedman had to admit late in his life, a paper money standard and the increased financial uncertainty brought about by a paper money standard actually increases expenditures. It increases the waste of resources insofar as activities such as hedging will become necessary. Financial newsletters and advisement agencies that otherwise would be unnecessary spring into existence. And in fact, the price of demonetized gold has risen, in fact, and accordingly the volume of gold production has actually increased rather than decreased. And the third myth governments promote is that money is part of social wealth. That is to say, that more money means greater wealth. Well, in fact, money is not part of social wealth, and any amount of money is equally optimal, and a larger amount of money only leads